She said I was too innocent, but every glance, every touch, told me she didn't mean it. I still remember the first time I saw her. It was my second week at the company, and I was still the new guy, still figuring out where the coffee machine was, still fumbling with people's names. She walked into the office like she'd been there a lifetime. She didn't have to demand attention. People just seemed to notice her without her trying. Her name was Claire. She was in her early 40s, though if you asked me then, I would have guessed younger. She had this natural grace about her, shoulders straight, voice steady, the kind of presence that made you feel safe just by standing next to her. Her laugh carried through the room, low and warm, and even people who weren't part of the joke seemed to soften when they heard it. At first, I only admired from a distance. I thought she was out of my league, not in the romantic sense, but in life experience. She had this confidence, this way of speaking, that made me feel like a kid just starting out. And maybe in her eyes, that's all I was, a 26-year-old still learning how to navigate adulthood. But then there were these little things. Small gestures that made me think maybe she wasn't as distant as I imagined. Like the morning she noticed I hadn't had coffee yet and placed a cup on my desk without saying anything. Or the time she paused during a meeting just to make sure I understood what was going on, though she did it in such a way that no one else noticed. It was subtle, but I noticed. And when her eyes met mine, just for a fraction of a second, I felt like she could see right through the nervous, polite exterior I'd put on at work. One late afternoon, when most of the office had already cleared out, I found myself across the table from her, going over numbers I couldn't quite untangle. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, and the city outside the windows had already slipped into that orange glow of sunset. She leaned over my shoulder, pointing at the screen, and her perfume, something soft and floral, drifted around me. I froze for a second, not because she was too close, but because the moment felt strangely intimate for a workplace setting. Her sleeve brushed against mine as she traced a line on my spreadsheet, and I caught myself staring at her hands. They weren't the hands of someone pretending to know the world. They were steady, capable, with the faintest touch of elegance in the way she carried them. When she looked at me, there was the faintest curve of amusement at the corner of her mouth, like she knew I was paying attention to things I probably shouldn't be. I looked away quickly, embarrassed, but the moment stayed with me. That was when I realized Claire wasn't just another coworker. She wasn't just someone I respected from afar. There was something about her that drew me in, something I couldn't name yet, but felt every time she walked into the room. The office had mostly emptied for the night. The low hum of the air conditioning filled the silence, and the glow of our computer screens was the only light in the room. I had offered to stay late and finish the report, but Claire stayed too, saying she'd just keep me company. At first, we worked quietly. The kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but strangely grounding. Every so often, I'd hear the faint scratch of her pen, or the soft rustle of papers as she flipped through a file. There was something calming about knowing she was across the table from me, close enough that I could sense her presence even when I wasn't looking directly at her. I leaned closer to my laptop, trying to make sense of a chart that refused to balance out. Claire noticed. She shifted her chair beside mine, and before I could react, she was right there, her shoulder brushing mine as she pointed at the numbers. Her perfume, something floral with a trace of vanilla, washed over me again, and I had to remind myself to focus on the spreadsheet instead of the warmth of her nearness. "You're overcomplicating it," she said softly, her voice steady and amused. Her hand hovered over mine for just a moment before she clicked on the trackpad, making quick adjustments. The chart snapped into place, balanced perfectly. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "Guess I still have a lot to learn." That's when she turned, studying me with that curious half-smile of hers. Her eyes lingered longer than I expected, searching, measuring. Then, in a tone that carried both teasing and truth, she said it. "You're too innocent for this place." The words landed like a spark in my chest. At first, I wasn't sure how to take it. Was she teasing me? Warning me? Dismissing me? Her face gave nothing away, except for that subtle curve of her lips. "Innocent?" I echoed, half laughing, though my voice cracked with something I couldn't quite hide. She tilted her head, her dark hair falling gracefully to one side. Yes. You still believe people mean what they say. You still trust too easily. That's rare around here. There was warmth in her tone, but also something protective, like she'd seen too many people lose that kind of innocence, and she didn't want to watch me do the same. I should have let it go, but instead I asked quietly, "Is that a bad thing?" She held my gaze, and for a heartbeat, the air between us felt charged. Then she gave a small, knowing smile. "Not bad. Just dangerous." Her hand brushed against my arm as she stood, gathering her papers. It could have been accidental, but it lingered just a moment too long to be meaningless. My skin burned where she touched me, and I sat frozen as she walked toward the door. When she looked back at me from the hallway, her eyes held something unspoken, half a warning, half a challenge. And in that moment I realized she might have meant something entirely different by calling me innocent. After that night, things between Claire and me shifted, subtly, but undeniably. It wasn't anything we spoke about out loud. On the surface, we were still just coworkers, still exchanging notes about deadlines and reviewing reports. But underneath, there was a new layer to every interaction. I noticed it first in the small moments. The way her eyes sought me out in a crowded meeting, holding my gaze for a second longer than necessary before looking away. The way her voice softened when she spoke to me, as if we shared a private language no one else could hear. One afternoon, as we sat across from each other, she asked casually about my weekend. I told her about helping my younger cousin move into his college dorm, how it made me feel like I was growing older too quickly. She leaned her chin into her hand, listening intently, as though what I said mattered more than anything happening in the office. "You make it sound so simple," she said finally, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Like the world hasn't worn you down yet." I shrugged, a little self-conscious. "Maybe it hasn't." She tilted her head, studying me with that same curious intensity one was beginning to know too well. "Don't lose that. It's rare." Her words lingered in the air, and for a second, I forgot where we were. The steady hum of the office faded into the background, and all I could focus on was the warmth of her gaze. Then there were the physical moments, small touches that seemed too natural to be entirely accidental. When she passed me a file, her fingers brushed mine, lingering for half a heartbeat longer than needed. When she walked behind my chair, her hand would rest briefly on my shoulder, grounding me, sending a subtle rush through my chest. And always there was her presence. The brush of her perfume when she leaned over to check my screen, the faint warmth of her sleeve grazing mine when we sat close, the quiet sound of her laugh slipping under my skin and staying there. But with every moment that drew us closer, a quiet conflict stirred inside me. I was 26, still figuring myself out, still earning my place in the world. She was 42, with a confidence I admired and a history I could only guess at. There were miles of experience between us, and yet, those miles didn't feel like a wall. They felt like a path I couldn't help but want to walk. Still, I couldn't ignore the questions echoing in my mind. Was I reading too much into her gestures? Did she mean them the way I felt them? Or was she simply kind, teasing, the way someone older might be with someone younger who looked up to them? Yet, every time her eyes lingered on me when she thought no one else was watching, I felt my doubts dissolve. Because in that unspoken silence, it wasn't just kindness I saw, it was something far more dangerous. Something that made my heart race even when I tried to convince myself it was nothing. And I knew then, whether she meant to or not, Claire was pulling me into her world, one glance, one touch, one stolen moment at a time. It happened on another late evening, one of those nights when the office seemed to belong to us alone. The city outside pulsed with distant lights, but inside, the only sound was the soft tapping of keys and the low hum of machines that never slept. Claire sat across from me, her hair falling loosely from the bun she'd worn all day. She looked different in that quiet light, less composed, less untouchable. There was something softer about her, something that made me forget she was the woman everyone admired for her composure and strength. We'd been working in silence when she suddenly closed her laptop with a sigh. She leaned back in her chair, eyes tracing the ceiling as though searching for an answer written up there. "Everyone thinks I have it all figured out," she said, her voice lower than usual. "But the truth is, I'm just tired." The words startled me. Claire never spoke like that, never let cracks show in her armor. I leaned forward, studying her face. "Tired?" I asked carefully. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Tired of pretending. Tired of being the one who always has to know what to say, how to act, what decision to make. Do you know how exhausting it is to be everyone's steady ground?" I hesitated. My instinct was to tell her she didn't seem that way at all, that she carried herself so effortlessly. But I realized that was the mask she was talking about. Instead, I said softly, "No one's steady all the time. Not really." Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp but vulnerable. "And yet, people believe it of me. Maybe I've just played the role too well." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd only ever seen her as this unshakable presence, someone I admired from a distance. To hear her admit she felt overlooked, even invisible beneath all that strength, it made her seem more human. And strangely, it made me want to protect her, even though I knew she was far more experienced than I was. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. She looked at me as though testing whether she could believe that. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Instead, she let out a breath, one that sounded like relief. Without thinking too much about it, I reached across the table. My hand found hers, resting lightly at first, uncertain. Her fingers twitched beneath mine, and for a moment I expected her to pull away. But she didn't. She let my hand stay there. Her skin was warm, her pulse steady against my palm. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of something unspoken, something fragile but undeniable. She didn't thank me. She didn't move her hand either. And in that moment, I realized something important. For all her confidence and composure, Claire needed someone to see her as more than the role she played. And somehow, she'd chosen to let me see her that way. It was supposed to be a simple team dinner. A handful of us from the office gathered at a quiet restaurant downtown, the kind with dim lighting, wooden tables, and soft music humming in the background. The kind of place where conversations overlapped in gentle waves. I ended up next to Claire. Whether by coincidence or design, I wasn't sure. All I knew was that when she slipped into the seat beside me, the air shifted. Her coat brushed against my arm as she settled, and the faint warmth of her presence seemed to anchor me more than the food or the chatter around us. Throughout the evening, we talked more than we should have. She asked about my childhood, about the small town I grew up in, about my parents, about the kind of boy I'd been at 16. I found myself answering more honestly than I expected, telling her stories that made her laugh softly, her hand covering her mouth as if she didn't want to laugh too loudly. At some point, I became aware of something else, her knee brushing mine beneath the table. At first, I thought it was an accident. I shifted slightly, but when her leg found mine again, and stayed, I knew it wasn't. My heart thudded, heavy and uncertain. She didn't look at me when she did it, just continued speaking to someone across the table, her expression calm, her tone measured. But that small point of contact burned through me like a secret I wasn't supposed to keep. Later, when the group parted ways outside, the night air was crisp and cool, the city buzzing quietly around us. Most of our coworkers drifted toward the subway, but Claire lingered by my side. "You heading home?" she asked, her voice casual, but her eyes searching. "Yeah," I said. "You?" She smiled faintly. "Eventually." We started walking together, our steps in sync. For a while neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, though. It was charged, threaded with something unspoken. The glow from the streetlights painted her features softly, catching in her hair, making her seem both untouchable and incredibly close. When she finally spoke, her words were quieter, almost as if she wasn't sure whether to say them aloud. "You really are too innocent. You don't even see how much you affect people. The teasing tone was there, but her voice trembled at the edges, betraying something deeper. I stopped walking for a moment, trying to process it. The way she looked at me then, direct, vulnerable, and almost staring, made my chest tighten. I wanted to answer, but no words came. Instead, I just stood there, caught in the space between what we were and what we could be. She gave me a small smile, the kind that carried both mischief and hesitation, and started walking again. I followed, my thoughts racing, my hand itching with the urge to reach for hers. And though I didn't that night, I knew something had shifted. We'd crossed an invisible line, quietly, subtly, but we both knew it was there. The days after that evening were strange. We went about our work like usual, exchanging emails, reviewing reports, attending meetings, but there was an unspoken current running through every interaction. Every glance, every casual brush of her hand, carried weight I couldn't ignore. I found myself overanalyzing the smallest gestures. When she passed me a pen, was it just convenience, or a tiny excuse to touch my hand? When she laughed at something I said, was it genuine amusement, or a teasing signal I wasn't supposed to catch? The uncertainty both thrilled and tormented me. Claire, too, seemed to pull back at times. She put on her composed, confident exterior, the same mask she wore in front of the rest of the office. Meetings were professional, emails were precise, and when others were around, she maintained distance. Yet, even in those moments, her eyes kept finding me. That fleeting glance across the room, the almost imperceptible smile when I said something she liked, they were like sparks in the dark. One afternoon, we were alone reviewing a project deadline. She leaned over my shoulder, pointing at the calendar. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, just enough to make my pulse jump. I caught her looking at me then, and for a second, our eyes locked. There was something in that look, a combination of hesitation, curiosity, and desire, that made me hold my breath. But just as quickly she pulled back, straightening her posture, resuming her professional mask. My heart sank slightly. Had I read it wrong? Had I imagined the subtle warmth of her touch? I walked home that evening with a swirl of thoughts in my mind. Part of me wanted to throw caution to the wind, to reach out and close the distance that had been building between us for weeks. But another part, quiet, reasonable, warned me to be careful. There was the age gap, the social perception, the fact that she was my senior, my mentor in many ways. Acting on impulse could ruin everything. Meanwhile, Claire's behavior mirrored my own conflict. Sometimes she'd linger in the hallway when I walked past, a soft smile on her face. Other times she'd avoid eye contact, busying herself with a file or checking her phone. It was as if she were torn between giving in to the pull she clearly felt and maintaining the professional boundaries she had always kept. Even in casual moments, the tension between us crackled. When she handed me a document, her fingers brushed my hand just long enough to leave an imprint in my memory. When she leaned over my desk to explain something, the warmth of her presence felt like a quiet promise. And yet, nothing happened, not yet. The hesitation was maddening, but it was also intoxicating. Every look, every touch, every unspoken word drew me deeper into the gravity of her presence. I knew that eventually, we'd have to confront it, to acknowledge the tension, the desire, the emotions that had been simmering beneath our careful masks. But for now, all we could do was dance around it, our hearts racing, our minds cautious, savoring every moment of closeness, while fearing what might come if we crossed that line too soon. It was another late evening when it finally happened. The office was quiet, most of the staff gone, leaving just the soft hum of the overhead lights and the distant sounds of the city beyond the windows. Claire and I walked out together, carrying the last of our files. The crisp night air wrapped around us, carrying the faint scent of rain and the muted glow of streetlights. We stopped near the corner, neither of us wanting the moment to end. The usual easy chatter between us had faded, replaced by a tension that neither of us had been able to ignore for weeks. I could see it in her eyes, the vulnerability, the hesitation, the flicker of something deeper, and it mirrored what I felt in my own chest. She turned to me, her expression open, almost fragile. I told myself I shouldn't, she began, her voice trailing off as if admitting it aloud made it more real. She swallowed, and I saw her glance down at her hands, twisting them slightly, a gesture I'd never noticed before. You shouldn't what? I asked softly, stepping closer. Her gaze lifted to meet mine, steady and unflinching now. I told myself I shouldn't feel this way about you, she admitted, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at her lips. But I do. And I don't want to pretend otherwise anymore. The words hit me with a quiet force, a culmination of every glance, every brush of skin, every subtle laugh and lingering pause over the past weeks. My chest tightened, my heart racing in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't rush, didn't speak at first. I simply took her hand in mine. Her fingers were warm, and her grip, gentle but firm, spoke of trust, of mutual understanding, of something we had both been avoiding but couldn't deny. You see me, don't you? She whispered, almost more to herself than to me. I do, I replied, my voice low but certain. I've always seen you. Her shoulders relaxed, and for a moment, it felt like the world had slowed. The city lights softened around us, the cool air brushing against our faces, carrying the faint scent of her perfume. I felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat through her palm, a quiet reassurance that this was real. We didn't rush into anything else. There was no dramatic confession, no grand gesture. Just the simplicity of our hands intertwined, the quiet acknowledgement of what had been building for weeks, the subtle pull, the unspoken attraction, the slow burn of emotions that had finally been given space to breathe. She leaned slightly against me, her cheek brushing my chest. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the calm steadiness in her breathing, and in that moment, I understood that this was exactly where we were meant to be, honest, present, and unafraid to acknowledge the connection that had grown between us. The hesitation, the teasing, the unspoken tension, it all faded into something gentle and grounding. For the first time, we allowed ourselves to be seen completely, without fear or pretense. And as we walked side by side into the quiet city night, hands still entwined, I realized something simple but profound. Some connections are worth the wait, worth the patience, and worth the quiet tension that makes every touch, every glance, every unspoken word feel infinitely meaningful. We had crossed the line, yes, but we had done it together, with understanding, care, and the kind of warmth that lingered long after the moment ended.